One of the questions I get from teachers the most is about how to manage Math Workshop. So today I'm sharing my best tips and strategies in 5 struggles you may be having with Math Workshop and what to do about it. Thanks for joining me, friends. Hey there, I'm Shamitria, the Rowdy Math teacher, and I've been a Texas educator for 20 years. I'm a lifelong learner and believe in helping other educators become better math teachers. In addition to providing professional development for teachers like you, I create standards-aligned math activities for upper elementary teachers that engage all learners through rigor and critical thinking so that students will be prepared to be productive members of their communities and solve problems in the world around them. So why is it so hard to implement Math Workshop? Well, first, I want to make sure that we're on the same page about what I mean when I say Math Workshop. When I talk about Math Workshop, I'm referring to your math centers and or guided math lessons. So really, I'm talking about your small group instruction in the classroom. And the reason why Math Workshop is hard to implement is because there are so many moving parts. Even if we just talk about math centers, we have behavior management, we have materials management, we have to think about differentiation, how to group the students, how to even communicate what the rotations are going to look like. How do you tell students where to go and how much time to spend doing it? So lots of questions there. And then when we add in the guided math part, there's even more questions. What to teach, how to teach it, how to group the students, how much time to spend with the students. There are so many questions and so many things to take into consideration when you're creating your Math Workshop structure. But today, I have 5 of the biggest struggles that I hear from teachers, and I have some solutions to help you make your Math Workshop run a little smoother in your classroom. Struggle number 1, your students can't work independently. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard this, friends. After 20 years of teaching, I probably have heard this hundreds and hundreds of times from teachers that their biggest struggle is that their students can't work independently. Well, I've got some very simple solutions for you. One thing I've learned over the years is that students will be much more successful during Math Workshop if they are familiar with the activities that they're being asked to complete. So that's my first solution for you, to focus on assigning activities and skills that are familiar to students to help them work independently. And so there's a couple of ways we can do that. First, we want to introduce the activities or games before we include them in math stations. One way to do this is to include them in your lesson. So if I'm doing a lesson on order of operations and I have a fun game I know that I want the students to do at math stations, I'm going to include that game as part of my lesson. So maybe when we get to the independent practice part of the lesson, I give them maybe 10 minutes to experience the game. I know they don't have time to finish it, but my goal here is just for them to be able to understand what to do and have a few minutes to play the game so that they can sit down the next time and kind of pick up right where they left off. They'll know exactly what to do. They'll know what each partner is supposed to do if it's a partner game. They'll know how to record their answers. Whatever the case may be, they'll have had some exposure to it, so they'll be able to sit down and get started working on it right away once they see that that's what's in their tub. Second, I want to use game and activity templates. And templates are fantastic for math stations. They're just basic games that students can play for any skill. They're perfect for you to fill out, or you don't have to fill it out. You can really use your computer to type in content. I'll talk about that a little more later. But you can type in the content on your computer, print it out, and you can use the same types of games for many skills. This does the same thing. Once students are familiar with that particular game format, then when they see it in the tub, they'll know exactly what to do. One of my favorites to use is called Cover Up. And so students basically roll dice. They add the two dice together, and then they look for the problem on the game board that matches that sum. They'll complete the problem, and then they'll look for the answer in a grid at the bottom of the page. And then at the bottom of the page, there's a grid with a lot of numbers in it, the solutions, and their goal is to cover up like 3 or 4 in a row. And that's a very simple game that can be used with a lot of skills, that once students know how to do that, they know how to do it. And when they see it, they're immediately able to get started because it's familiar to them. The last thing is to create task sheets. I know that it's an extra task for us as teachers to create the task sheets, but it does help students to have something to refer to. So when I'm creating my station rotations, I have a task sheet template, which I use the same one for all the stations, and I write on there exactly what students are supposed to do. So even if I'm using, like, let's say I'm using a board game. A few years back, I found a bunch of really fun board games that practiced some of the skills, allowed students to practice, rather, some of the skills that I was teaching. But the directions were really complicated. So rather than have students read the directions from the box, I simplified the directions and wrote them on the task sheet. Now, this also goes back to the first thing that I said. It'd be important for students to have some exposure to that game prior to me including it in a math station. But I also want to create that task sheet with a very kid-friendly directions, so that if for some reason they have forgotten what to do, they could refer to that task sheet and know what to do. So students not being able to work independently is oftentimes a management issue because they just simply didn't know what to do, and it took too long for them to figure out what to do. And we know some of our students, if they don't know what to do, they're just going to check out on us. So having familiar activities will help them be able to work independently. The next struggle that I hear from teachers is that they're struggling to find meaningful activities that align with their standards. Boy, I know one of the toughest things about being an elementary school teacher is teaching multiple subjects. And it makes it so hard to spend a significant amount of time on one thing because you have many other things that you have to do. And boy, planning for language arts and reading is just a beast. We all know that, right? So I know that sometimes you don't have as much time to plan for math. So I'm going to give you a couple of strategies that you can use to help kind of pare down the amount of work that it takes to prepare your math stations. So my solution for not having meaningful activities is to repurpose materials you already have and focus on finding new materials that can be used in multiple ways. So here's a way to do that. First, we all have some type of textbook that we're using. So I know that the paper textbooks that we used to carry around in our backpacks that were so heavy is a little bit of a thing of the past for most of us. But many people do have some type of online resource that you're using with your students. So the word problems that are in those textbook series are great for repurposing into math stations. In fact, they make really awesome task cards. And there are some ways that you can jazz those task cards up jazz the task cards up, but to jazz the word problems up to make them a little more challenging. I will put a link to a blog post I wrote about how to make your word problems a little meatier in the section below the video. So please look for it there. The second thing is to fill in templates with free content. So I talked about the math game and activity templates earlier, but some people, once we talk about the templates, will say, okay, Shmitria, what do I do with the templates? How do I find content for the templates? There's free content all over the web. You could do a search for a subject, or not subject, but a skill and worksheet in Google and find a worksheet for just about anything. So if I'm looking for multiplying 2-digit numbers by 3-digit numbers worksheets, I can put that into Google and a bunch of worksheets will result in the search result. So what you can do with that content is use those problems to fill in your game and activity templates. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, Shmitria, isn't that against the copyright? Yes, if you're going to sell it or if you're going to give it to a bunch of people. But if you're just needing activities for your classroom, you can find content wherever you like. And there are some like math problem generators on the web that you can find as well. There are some worksheet companies that they just use a generator to generate problems. And so those problems are all pretty generic. There's nothing specific about them. So I would encourage you to look for those as well. Those are great ways to fill in your game templates quickly. And then finally, you can transform worksheets into games. You can do this just simply taking a worksheet. Let's say there's 20 questions on the worksheet. We'll take that worksheet and a game board. So find a game board, kind of like the ones with the fun paths on them. Maybe there's some little statements that say go back 2 spaces or move forward 2 spaces. You know the kind of game boards I'm talking about. There's a lot of templates for that on the web and also on Teachers Pay Teachers. If that's a place where you shop, you can find lots of game board templates, but you can just simply take each of the problem numbers and put it on the game board. So you take the path on the game board and number each of those. And so when students, let's say, roll a die or toss a coin, they land on a space on the board, then it tells them a number, they go and they do that problem. And then they either get it right or wrong. You know, if they get it right, they could stay there. If they get it wrong, maybe they have to move back. But you can kind of, decide on how you want that to work in your classroom. But that's a simple way to jazz up a worksheet. And also you can take that same worksheet and put those problems into one of the game templates. Those of you that are task card lovers, you can do the same thing, kind of pairing a task card with a board game. You can also take, like I mentioned, the cover-up type activity earlier. You can take that and you can write the solutions to all the task cards in the grid part of the cover-up game. And students can cover that up. Actually, I also have some games called like Connect 4 and Connect 5 that don't have the questions at the top. It's just a grid of like 16 boxes or 25 boxes. And so you can put all the answers in there and have students cover those as they answer the task cards. The other thing that you can do is just put the numbers in there, and once they pick a spot on the board, they answer that task card. If they get the task card correct, then they get to stay there. They get to put a little marker there to mark their space. If they get it wrong, then they don't get to mark that space. There's lots of ways that you can use the materials you already have in new and engaging ways for your students. Struggle number 3 is that you're struggling to figure out what to teach, new content or content that has been taught previously. So the solution to this one is to use student data to determine needs. And there's a couple of ways that we can use that data. First, we want to review content via non-teacher table stations. So when you're thinking about your math stations that are not the teacher table, you want to include content that students need to review. And when I say review, I don't mean things that they need to be retaught. So if you look at your data and you have, let's say, skills that 60-70% of your students have mastered, so we still have a group that hasn't mastered, those are probably things that you want to review. The students are still kind of working on mastering those skills. You don't have the whole class has mastered them. Those are perfect things to review. If you have skills that only 40 or 50% of your students have mastered, I would say that those are definitely reteach type skills, not review. Next, you want to spiral in content students have already mastered. So if you have skills that, let's say, 90% of your students have mastered, those are just spiral ins. You want to just keep things fresh and you want them to remember that content. So I would sprinkle those in every now and again. Maybe every couple of weeks, sprinkle in if you have several of those topics, sprinkle in one of those topics each week. And then you'll have several review topics, and then you'll have your teacher table. And then you're going to teach new content or intervene with your teacher table. So those skills that only 40 or 50% of your students have mastered or less than that, those are the skills that you want to do that targeted instruction with at your guided math lesson table. That's what you want to focus there on. Or if you have your structure set up to where you are teaching new content through your guided math lessons, then that you can use your student data to decide what each group kind of needs. So I would never just teach a whole new lesson that is brand new. You haven't introduced it all. I wouldn't teach that in a math workshop. I would do some type of introduction with the whole class lesson, and then maybe do like an exit ticket or kind of figure out who has different levels of mastery of that skill already, and then use that data to determine what to teach at your guided math lesson for that particular skill. All right, struggle number 4, and I hear this one time and time again. You have a short math block and don't have enough time to teach core content and do math stations. I'm here to tell you it does not matter how long your math block is, you have time to teach core content and do math stations. It's a matter of how you organize your time. So I'll give you some strategies for that next. Our solution here is to use a flexible schedule for Math Workshop and vary your daily activities. Here's what I mean by that. One strategy is to complete one rotation a day. So let's say you have a 50 or 60-minute math block. You could decide to do a 30-minute math lesson, whole class math lesson, and then use your remaining 20 or 30 minutes to do a rotation. If you have a 5-day school week, then you can do a 5-station rotation and you would do one rotation each day of the week. That's plenty of time. If you've got a good 20-minute chunk of time, that's a great amount of time for a math station. I've seen teachers do 10 minutes. I think 10 minutes is really tough, especially to get students engaged in the activity in that time. So 20 minutes is really optimal. 15 minutes will work, but 20 minutes is an optimal time. So if you've got a 50-minute math block, you could do a 30-minute lesson and then a 20-minute rotation. That's absolutely possible and works just fine. Next, you want to take more time to introduce new skills, and that's really important in math. If you know anything about me, you know that I believe in conceptual understanding. So I think it's really important when we introduce a new skill to give students an opportunity to really explore that content and to start to come up with conjectures and make generalizations about that skill on their own. So I would recommend doing that like on a Monday, the first day of your lesson, and then using your math station time to review that content or even to do some small group lessons to help students who may be struggling with that content. And then finally, we want to practice and extend learning via Math Workshop. And that's kind of what I just talked about. You want to teach your lesson like a whole group lesson, really giving students a chance to explore that content, and then you can include some practice and review activities during math stations. Now, I want to be clear, if your students are still struggling with that content, that's not a good skill to put in your math stations. Remember what I said earlier, we want to create situations where students feel comfortable, they're familiar with the skills and the activities. So if students are really struggling, then I would not include that particular skill in your math stations. But as students become more comfortable with it, it is something that you can include in your math stations. You can also include maybe a prerequisite skill for a topic that you're working on to give students a little more practice with it that will help them hopefully make the connections that they need to make in order to master the new content that you're working on in your whole class lessons. And finally, struggle number 5, you're worried about keeping students engaged and on task while you're working with a small group. I have to say this is probably the number one struggle that I hear from teachers is how to keep students engaged and on task. So I'm excited to share some suggestions with you. I know you know this, but this is the biggest barrier to success with Math Workshop is behavior management. So my solution for this one, for keeping kids engaged and on task, is to create and share expectations for all components of Math Workshop. And that's going to take some time. I want your mantra to be, we go slow to go fast. And so that's kind of the strategy that I have here for you. First, you want to collaboratively create expectations. Really think through what students need to know in order to be successful with math stations. And I'm not talking about need to know in terms of math content. I'm talking about what types of activities do they need to be comfortable with? Do they need to know how to play games? If you're going to have games as part of your math stations, then your students have to know what playing games looks like and sounds like in your classroom. And so you want to take the time to collaboratively create those expectations. If your students use math menus, if you use manipulatives, if you use calculators, which I know could be considered a manipulative, but if you use math tools during math stations, you have to develop expectations for all of those things. That's going to be really important to holding students accountable. Again, sometimes our students are off task simply because they really didn't understand what was expected of them. So if you have created these expectations collaboratively, then you can easily point to them and say, hey, reminder, this is what you're supposed to be doing right now. This is what this activity looks like and sounds like. I also want to encourage you to start small and begin with just 2 math stations. It's very easy to be hands-on with students when you're only monitoring 2 different math stations. So I want to encourage you to start with 2. So for me, what that might look like, I use math games all the time. So that's one of the things that I'm going to start doing immediately. It's one of the first sets of expectations that I develop with my students. So I might have half of my class playing games, partner games. And then I may have the other class, half of the class, working on a math menu. So I'm just doing those 2 things. And once students have really mastered that and I've had a chance to watch to see what they're doing and I can provide feedback, then we'll start adding on more stations. But I want to start with just the 2 so that I can be more hands-on and have a chance to provide corrective feedback. Lastly, you want to use the first minute to check on students. Now, this one is more for once you kind of get things in full swing. My expectation in my classroom is that students must be on task within 1 minute of that station rotation starting. So I have my visual clock, or visual timer rather, where students can see it and they know by the end of that first minute they're expected to be on task and working. And I know that you might be saying to yourself, boy, that's really hard. It may be really hard, but our students can do it. It takes practice in developing the expectations. And I will say also, it takes preparation. So one of the things that I do is I create game boxes for my students so that they have those readily available. In fact, when I practice different games and activities with students during our lessons, I take 10 minutes. So I'll tell them, hey, we're going to do a quick game. I have the game sheets here. I have your game boxes here. You know who your partner is. It's either I either tell them their shoulder partner or their face partner. And I'm going to assign one of them, either partner A or partner B, to come up and get materials. They're going to grab a game box and they're going to grab a game board to get back to their seat and get started. They know what to do. So they have 1 minute. You walk up, you get your materials, you go back to your seat and you start working. So when I do math stations, I take that very first minute to make sure that there aren't any questions. So they know if they have a question, they've got to get their hand up quickly to ask me in that first minute. And after that first minute, they're expected to be on task and working for the remainder of the station rotation time until the timer goes off, where they have 1 minute to clean up and get ready to rotate. And I know that sounds like a lot, but when you set that expectation, our students are capable of meeting you at that level. So challenge them to do that. I hope these strategies and tips have been helpful for you. I do have a 1-page cheat sheet for you that includes the struggles and the strategies and tips that I mentioned here in the video, and you can download that if you look at the section below the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me at shmitria@therowdymathteacher.com. I want to thank you for joining me for this video. It was a lot of fun to put together. And I do want to remind you to grab your free resource using the links below the video. Take care.